What's going on, mi gente? It's Diego Montalvan back with you to talk about another conmebol nation right before the qualifiers. Today, I am joined by Jordan and Dominic from FUTVE English to talk about Venezuela and what's going on with them, their qualifying campaign, and the last two matches. So first of all, thank you guys for your time. How you guys doing?
I'm great.
All
Thanks
good.
for having us.
Bye.
Now, I want to talk about Venezuela, obviously, and their qualifying campaign. Again, they don't make the World Cup. How would you grade it in their qualifying campaign?
Jordan, you want to go first?
Yeah, well, if we're going to go on a 1 to 10 scale, I'd give it a 3. If we're going to go A to F, I'd give it an E. For me, it was only marginally better than abject failure. Out of myself and Dominic, when we do the FUTVE English podcast, Dominic is always the one that finds the positive, whereas I tend to the negative. So perhaps Dominic will be slightly more generous.
Maybe a little. Well, I'll rate it for letters. I'll rate it with the D because I don't think I was told the letter E didn't exist in grading. But it's tough. We'll talk about this more later. But I think there's almost like two separate Venezuelas that we have to grade because at portions of this campaign there was a strong squad full of players that were playing in Europe and all these sorts of things, and then at other points all of that was gone and it was a much more bare bones group made of MLS players, Liga FUTVE players, other South American leagues, players playing in other South American leagues. So that there are some discrepancies there. I guess I'll go with 3 or 4 to be honest. There were a lot of low points for sure.
What needs to change for Venezuela? Because like you guys mentioned, I think Venezuela has talent. They have some young players that I think could do a lot more. Is it the federation? Is it the coaching? Is it not giving enough time to the process?
It was unfortunate timing how this World Cup qualifying fell for Venezuela. Perhaps without COVID, we'd be in a very different situation right now. Every country is probably entitled to say that, but for Venezuela, where the fixtures were then pushed forward and condensed, it ended up the way things fell was Jose Pizarro resigned, and I'll mention that more later. But what needs to change, I think, has already changed. Bringing in Peckerman, a guy of his caliber, of his background, and giving him a free rein to change things is preempting. Instead of making this change after qualifying's finished, we've made it early, forced to by the resignation of Pizarro, but also during the campaign, not only did the head coach change, but the people in charge of the federation changed as well. So it was like a new project beginning during an in-progress project and trying to qualify for the first World Cup. Peckerman's been, like I said, been given free rein and has already executed some big changes, not just for the national teams, but also for the league. The league itself is now going to be without the juvenile rule, which it's had for like 14 years, which stipulates every team must start with an under-20 player. It's had its successes, but it did divide opinions somewhat, and Peckerman has axed that rule and replaced it, per se, with an under-23s league. And also President Jimenez of the Federation has confirmed that Venezuela will take part in the Toulon tournament in June, the most prestigious youth tournament in world football, perhaps aside from the under-20 World Cup.
Yeah, I think just to add on to that, as Jordan was addressing there, I think unfortunately this campaign was hurt. Two big clouds over this are sins of the past, sins of the previous administration with the Venezuelan Football Federation, and then again, of course, COVID, and every team is affected by COVID, like Jordan said. But I think it's fair to say that if COVID-19 had never happened, this entire table would probably just look very different for everybody. And so you can't help but acknowledge that probably affects Venezuela. It also affects Venezuela as an example in the sense that all-time top goal scorer isn't able to come to multiple international breaks because of travel rules, that being Salomon Rondon, who of course was joining Everton and then at Everton during resulting international window. So and at certain points that came into play with other players as well. So yeah, I do think that there's a lot of optimism now around this new administration, of course, around Peckerman coming in, and I do think that most of the malicious factors that kind of ruined this campaign, in a way, it started before the campaign ever did. And so I am hopeful for the future. We'll talk more about this, but I am hopeful for the future because I think already a lot of things are being fixed for 2026.
You guys mentioned Peckerman, and I think that's a good segue to my next question, which, right, Peckerman to me, I think was great with Colombia during the time that he was there. Now he's with Venezuela. I think if you give him time, the process, right, things could work. But was that the key moment for you guys in Venezuela's campaign, or was there something else that was key to where they're at right now?
For me, I think the key moment, like obviously linked to Peckerman coming in, but was the resignation of Pesero, because we played 8 games in qualifying between Pesero resigning and replacing him with Peckerman. And in that time, Leo Gonzalez, who was also managing Deportivo Lara at club level at the same time, was in charge. And in that 8-game period, we lost 7 games. So that killed the campaign. I think when Pesero resigned, that was 10 games ago. So we were only 6 games into the campaign, a third of the way into a campaign, by no means out of the running. Because at that point, we had a win and a draw. We had 4 points, and we certainly weren't out of the running at all. I think that middle third of our qualifying campaign killed it.
Yeah, to the point of the question about Peckerman, but then also what Jordan says, I think the high and low points of this campaign both have to do with management or managers. Pesero leaving and then Gonzalez coming in, that transition, and Gonzalez is a very talented manager, but to do 2 full-time jobs as part-time jobs, and to come in last minute like that into such a steep challenge, I just don't think that he or frankly anyone else that was an option was prepared to take on the mountain he had to climb there. And Pesero not being there to continue the journey that he was on after a tumultuous but uplifting Copa America that summer and some high points in qualifying. As soon as that switch happened, I think a lot of people, even optimistic me, started to think, this might not be happening. This is just too many twists and turns at such a key moment, about halfway through the qualifiers. But to your point about the question, yeah, I think Peckerman coming in is a high point. And obviously his first game was a high point, the 4-1 win against Bolivia. I think that, people are, even the more hot take-y reporters and people in Venezuelan football are very positive about, the potential he has with Venezuela to develop the first team, as Jordan mentioned, to develop the youth and the league organizations as well. And even the Uruguay loss, which was the last game that we've played, which was a 4-1 loss, his comments after both games were very uplifting, in the sense that after the win, he was like, this is great, but there's a lot more we got to do. Not every team is Bolivia. And after the Uruguay game, he essentially, I'm paraphrasing, but essentially was saying, yeah, well, this is the lesson we needed to learn. We need to remember that not everything's solved yet. Just because I'm here, there's a lot more work to do. So I'm very happy with the approach he seems to be taking so far.
Now, for this qualifying campaign, is there, obviously, where Venezuela sits right now, I think there's some games that they could have closed out. There's some games that they could have won. Is there any game that stands out to you guys in where Venezuela should have done more, should have done better, should have won?
Yeah, I think there were 2 main games that we should or could have won, and hopefully Dominic agrees with me. So I'll take one and he can highlight the other. But the 0-0 against Uruguay in Caracas could have easily gone Venezuela's way. Josef Martinez had a goal disallowed early on. I thought that was tenuous to disallow the goal. I can't remember the circumstances around it now, but I remember feeling at the time that could have gone either way. And yeah, it was in the opening stages. The entire game could have gone very differently had Venezuela been in the lead early doors, particularly seeing that we then kept a clean sheet.
Yeah, just for the sake of detail, I recall the Joseph Martinez goal, which would have made it 1-0, I think, in the first half. He essentially chested down the ball and did kind of a half volley. But when he chested it, VAR saw that it kind of deflected off his chest onto his arm and then the ground. And so they, and yeah, that's one of those calls that's like, I kind of understand either way on that one. You see that called both ways all the time. So yeah, the Uruguay game, by all means, you know, you get 3 points against them, that would have been huge. And that was relatively early on as well. I actually have sort of 1/3 games in mind. I have a feeling the other one Jordan's referring to is the 1-0 loss to Paraguay at home. That was in Merida. That was within the first month or two of qualifying, in which Yangel Herrera had a goal disallowed, which was also kind of iffy, and then missed a penalty, and Paraguay then scored like 92nd minute and won the game. That was a early heartbreaker that in most situations Venezuela would have won or drawn, but perhaps a bit unlucky as well. I know there was some question about having Herrera take that penalty kick because he had just come on, was not necessarily the designated taker people would imagine on the team. But also then that comes to mind the other Paraguay game, the game in Paraguay, and then both games against Peru were lost by 1 goal. So there were a lot of games against the teams that you would want to do better against if you want to fight for that 5th place playoff position that were marginally lost. And I think those were the kinds of games, we lost to Brazil, we lost to Argentina. At a certain point, you have to accommodate for that. But those tight losses, some at home, some on the road, to the Paraguays, the Perus, to a certain extent, Uruguay is part of that group now. Those were 4 or 5 games. Those were where the campaign definitely fell off the cliff for me.
Now, throughout this campaign, obviously you guys mentioned the negative moments, the positive moments. Is there any player for you that stands out that you said, shined throughout all this?
For me, no. In a one-word answer, no. Just because there were so many ups and downs in this tournament, there wasn't really like momentum built. There were players that were key players at particular moments, like Rondon at the beginning and the end. He got us the win over Chile, the first win of their campaign. He got us the win against Bolivia, our so far final win of the campaign. Soteldo had a patch where he was very good for a few games, even though we didn't win all of those games. And then obviously the Copa America was in the middle of all of this, and it was a vastly changed Venezuela team for the Copa America due to 13 COVID absences on the eve of the tournament. I'd say our most consistent player was Brujo Martinez, who plays at Philadelphia Union in MLS. I think that was probably emphasized by the fact it was his first full year in the national team.
Yeah, Jose Martinez was by all means a standout. Although, as Jordan noted, every player had rough patches. I know there were many people that were critical of him this last window, which was fair. But overall, 2021 particularly, that span of games, he, I think, went from having no caps to being like a must, at least in the squad, if not the 11. So I mean that's a huge shift for him. Jordan touched on this. When he was available, Rondon was good, was very good, and scored quite a few goals. Of course, the problem is that in this whole campaign, he probably will only have ended up playing in like 6 games, something like that, which simply isn't enough to have a real impact. And there were other players that shined moments. Eduardo Bello scored a crazy goal against Ecuador, and overall just had good performances. Darwin Machis ended up becoming like the primary goal threat for us for a while there. Scored several goals across a few games at the end of 2021. Wilka Fariñas is, of course, a great goalkeeper, and he had some great games, but at the same time, certainly could have done better in some situations and was put on the hot spot by his defenders on multiple occasions. And so, yeah, it's when you're bottom of the table, it's probably hard to have a clear MVP, so to say. But there were certainly players that at least improved their stock. A lot of MLS players, Martinez, like we mentioned before, Christian Castros Jr. as well. But yeah, again, it's hard to highlight someone when there were so many negative results.
Now, talking about the next two games, like you just mentioned, Venezuela sits in 10th place with 10 points. Not much, essentially nothing to play for, really. But they have Argentina at home, and no, I'm sorry, they have Argentina in Argentina and Colombia in Venezuela. You could still hurt Colombia, though. What is that something that would motivate, you think, the team, the players, even Peckerman, to be honest?
Yeah, for sure. I think there's plenty of Venezuelans that would love to ruin the party at the last moment, particularly on Venezuelan soil. And the Peckerman narrative is unavoidable there. I think from the final games, obviously the dream is always to win them both. Realistically, I think 4 points is the most that we could hope for, a draw away and a win at home. I expect that we finish with 3 points. I really do think we'll end with a win.
Yeah, it's obviously Argentina away is tough, and of course their record this particular campaign, where they have yet to lose, is not great to look at as the traveling side. For what it is worth, there are some things in the air that make me hopeful for perhaps a draw. One being that Argentina equally has nothing to play for besides pride, and of course, they're going to have fans that are going to want them to win, but they are locked in second. They have nothing really to worry about in terms of table position, and it is worth reminding that in the 2018 World Cup campaign, we drew Argentina twice on the road and away. And the away game was actually the second or third to last game. So it was very similar to this situation. That was 1-1, I want to say. So, there's some threads of hope that perhaps there's a result there, but it's going to be tough. But Colombia game, as you suggested, is the focus, I think, particularly because hopefully, a lot of fans are going to come to the game. And the rivalry between Venezuela and Colombia in football is not, most people would describe it as a very familial one, for obvious reasons. Anyone that knows sort of basic history will know that obviously there's so many connections between the two countries. But that doesn't change that I think most people would enjoy ruining the party a little bit. To be perfectly frank, I think I would enjoy ruining the party a little bit. And I think, you saw some motivation in the last window when there was very little to play for. I hope that carries over. I hope that Peckerman, who of course has a dog in the fight a little bit as well, can help bring that forward, give something to play for, make this crowd have, one good memory of this campaign, and make, Venezuela and Colombia have to stay home and, I guess, cheer for Ecuador at the World Cup.
Very good. Very good. I like that. Look, to be honest, thank you guys so much for your time. I want to leave the floor open to you guys if you guys have any closing comments, and also let the people know where they can find you guys.
Well, I think one closing comment is I'd like to say that next time Venezuela play competitive football, because it's going to be a long time. Obviously, there's no Copa America this year, so after this game, we're looking at 15 months before a competitive game. Look out for Venezuela at the Toulon tournament. It's quite possible that they'll be the only South American team. The official lineup is confirmed, I think, in a week's time. But we know the president has openly said that Venezuela's taken part. So look out for that, because it's an under-23 tournament and there's a lot of good young talent in Venezuela. This year, the Player of the Year award went to an 18-year-old, Yerson Chacon. And the Young Player of the Year award went to Telasco Segovia, also 18, both 2003. Where to find us, I'll let Dominic tell you.
Yeah. Well, quick, my last notes will just be, like Jordan said, there's a lot of optimism for the future. I hope that this last window, the most can be made out of it. Yeah, the Copa America, the next Copa America is far away. So I hope that, we see Peckerman and the Federation do what they can, both in youth and the senior sides, to continue to create development opportunities, find ways to play. Obviously, that will probably have to be through friendlies and tournaments. But I hope we see progress there. I hope we see clear effort to prepare for the next campaign, because I think that's so key to a successful campaign, is simply being active, having minutes with each other, having Peckerman have time to put his ideas into the squad. Yeah, where to find us? FUTVE English is the core of what we do. So that's you can find us on Twitter at FUTVE English. That's FUTVE English, ENGLISH. And we cover just about every aspect of Venezuelan football there. We both have our respective Twitter accounts as well. Mine's DJBISOGNO. I'm blanking on Jordan's, but look up Jordan Floret. Yeah, we appreciate the opportunity to talk here. We appreciate you reaching out to us, and we hope that we've convinced some people to not be too pessimistic about Venezuelan football, because there's certainly still plenty to look forward to on the horizon.
No, thank you guys so much. Honestly, like I've said, I personally think that Venezuela has talent to do more, right? I think I am very optimistic with the announcement of Peckerman and what we've seen from him. And like you guys said, the free reign that he has now over Venezuelan football, I think that more can be done. So I hope to see more from Venezuela in the next campaign. So that's all for today, guys. Thank you guys for viewing this. This is just one out of the 10 nations. We'll have more. So please comment, like, and subscribe.